My name is David Reyes, and this happened when I was 31 years old in Las Vegas, during a weekend trip I took alone. I had driven out from California for a poker tournament at the Venetian, lost $2,000 in 12 hours, which wasn't the end of the world, but it felt like it at the time. I left the casino around 2 a.m. and headed to the parking garage on level 4, where I'd left my rental. The garage was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered across concrete that smelled like oil and something metallic I couldn't place. My rental was a gray sedan, completely forgettable. I unlocked it and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, before starting the engine. That's when I noticed the parking attendant standing 2 cars away, perfectly still, watching me. He wore a red vest with Vegas Parking Management embroidered on it. His face was impossible to see clearly, just a blur in the fluorescent light, like a photograph of someone whose features hadn't developed properly. I looked away and turned the key. The engine started. I pulled out slowly, watching him in my rearview mirror. He didn't move. He just stood there as I drove toward the exit ramp. The ramp spiraled down, past level 3, past level 2, past level 1. I knew the garage only had 4 levels. I'd parked on 4. I should have been exiting onto street level. Instead, the ramp kept descending. I pressed the brake. The car slowed but kept moving downward like it was pulled by something. The walls changed color as I descended. Red became gray, became black. The fluorescent lights overhead started flickering, creating strobing shadows across the garage floor. I could see the ramp continuing downward, spiraling into darkness. I tried turning the steering wheel to the right, to exit the ramp or hit a wall, something to stop the descent. The wheel wouldn't respond. The car kept moving down at exactly the same speed, like it was on rails. I pressed the gas pedal. The car accelerated downward faster. I pressed the brake harder. The car slowed but continued its descent. The only speed I could control was how fast I went down, not whether I went down. After what felt like 5 minutes of spiraling descent through absolute blackness, a light appeared. Not fluorescent this time, something older. A yellow-green glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. They weren't walls anymore. They were concrete, yes, but they looked like they had been down here for decades. The edges were crumbling, the paint peeling. And carved into the concrete were symbols, hundreds of them, running down the spiral in continuous patterns. They looked like parking spaces. Row after row after row, stretching infinitely downward. I could see cars in some of them, not recent cars. Vintage cars. 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. All of them perfectly preserved. All of them abandoned. I finally reached the bottom of the spiral. The ramp opened into a massive garage level that couldn't possibly exist beneath a Las Vegas casino. It stretched for what looked like miles in every direction. The ceiling was impossibly high, supported by concrete pillars that disappeared into shadow, and it was full of cars, thousands of them, all parked perfectly in rows, all facing the same direction, all empty. A figure stood between the rows directly in front of my car, the parking attendant. But now I could see his face clearly. It was my face, exactly my face. Same scar on my left eyebrow from a car accident when I was 16. Same slight asymmetry in the nose, identical. He held up a clipboard and pointed downward toward it. I didn't want to look. I knew I had to look. Written on the clipboard was my name, my driver's license number, my license plate, and a timestamp. The timestamp said I had parked here 30 years ago. Not 30 years in the future. 30 years in the past. Before I was even born. The parking attendant raised his other hand and pointed to a space behind my car. Row 47, space 188. I turned to look. My exact car was already parked there. Gray sedan. Same rental company sticker on the bumper. The parking attendant's voice came out in multiple frequencies at once, like he was speaking through static. You're the 5th one this week who noticed they were already parked. The others accepted it by now. They're still in their cars. Level 7, row 23 through row 32. They've been here since the parking garage learned how to copy people instead of just collecting them. I slammed the accelerator forward. The car rocketed through the row of parked vehicles. But the garage kept expanding. The number of rows multiplied as I drove. I could see more attendants now, all wearing the same red vest, all with my face, all holding clipboards, all pointing at spaces I was apparently already parked in. I drove for what felt like hours through the descending levels of that garage. The cars got older as I descended further. 1930s vehicles, 1900s carriages, and then something that wasn't a car at all. Just a wooden wagon. Then a horse skeleton in a space marked with a brand symbol I didn't recognize. The attendants kept multiplying, each one more fractured than the last. By the time I reached what should have been the bottom level, there were dozens of versions of me, all wearing the parking vest, all holding clipboards, all watching as I drove through. One of them reached out and placed his hand on my car window. His hand didn't make contact with the glass. It passed through it like the window wasn't there. He leaned into the car. "You're still descending," he said. "You've been descending since you parked 2 levels below the casino. You think you drove down for hours, but it's been 30 seconds. But you'll keep going down because that's how the garage works. It doesn't matter how fast you drive or which direction you turn. You'll always be descending." I took my hands off the wheel completely. I sat back in the seat and watched the garage expand around me. The rows of parked cars became a blur, then a solid wall of vehicles pressing against me from both sides. The attendants became less distinct, just blurs of red vest and white clipboard. I felt the car moving forward, but I wasn't driving it anymore. The garage was driving me. The parking garage beneath Vegas isn't a space you can exit. It's a collection. And once you're collected, you help collect the others. I woke up on street level in the casino parking garage. My watch said 2:03 a.m., the same time I'd left the casino. My clock didn't change. My car was exactly where I'd parked it on level 4. When I checked my phone, I had photos I didn't take. Parking garage selfies. Dozens of them. In every photo, I was standing next to the attendant. In some photos, we looked exactly the same. In the last photo, there were 3 versions of me. And in the background, infinitely deeper levels spiraling downward into darkness, each one full of parked cars, each one weighted by an attendant who used to be someone who drove in by mistake. My name is Catherine Pierce, and this happened when I was 29 years old during a work conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma that I didn't want to attend. I was a medical sales rep, and these conferences were nightmares. Forced networking, bad buffets, and hotel rooms that all looked the same. I arrived Friday afternoon and checked into the Budget Inn on 11th Street. It was the typical budget motel. Yellow exterior paint peeling at the corners, ice machine that hummed like it was dying, parking lot cracked from the summer heat. My room was 237, 3rd floor, end of the hallway. The room was clean enough. Double bed, bathroom with a shower that had weak pressure, a TV from 2005. I dropped my bag on the bed and immediately wanted to leave. The conference didn't start until tomorrow morning. I thought about going to the bar downstairs, but I was too tired. So I took a shower and ordered pizza. The pizza arrived at 7:45 p.m. I tipped the delivery guy and closed the door. I set the pizza box on the small table and turned on the TV. Around 8:30, I heard voices next door, loud voices. A man and a woman arguing. The walls were thin. I could hear every word. They were fighting about money, about infidelity, about whether they should even keep trying. It was intense and uncomfortable, the kind of thing where you feel guilty for hearing it. I turned the TV up louder to drown them out. Around 9 p.m., the arguing stopped. I thought they'd either reconciled or one of them left. Around 10 p.m., the arguing started again. Same fight. Same words. Same accusations. The man was saying the exact same things he'd said an hour earlier, word for word. I realized then that I'd heard this before, the exact sequence. The woman's response was identical. Her tone, her breathing between sentences. Everything was the same. I turned off the TV and listened carefully. They were definitely repeating, like someone had recorded the argument and was playing it back, or like they were trapped in the same moment, forced to reenact it over and over. At 10:47 p.m., the arguing stopped for exactly 17 minutes. Then it started again at 11:04 p.m. Same sequence, same words. I lay in bed, listening to them cycle through the fight for 3 hours straight. Always exactly the same. Always stopping for exactly 17 minutes. Always restarting at exactly the same moment. Around 1 a.m., I heard the man's voice say something different. Something that had never come in the sequence before. In a calm voice, he said, "She's listening now." The woman didn't respond. The man continued, "Catherine is listening from room 237. She started noticing the pattern. We have to adjust." The arguing stopped. Complete silence. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. They knew I was listening. They knew my name. They knew my room number. I didn't leave the room. That was stupid. I should have packed and left immediately. But I didn't. I sat there listening as the silence continued for 5 minutes. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside my door. For 30 seconds, someone stood there, not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing. Then the footsteps moved away. They went to the room on the other side of me. Room 235. I heard a door open and close. Then arguing started from that direction. But it was different arguing, a different couple, a different fight. But the same exact tone, the same rhythm, the same argument about money and infidelity. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. The TV in my room was still on, muted. But the closed captions were running. And the captions weren't showing what was on the screen. They were showing the arguing couple's dialogue, word for word, both from next door and from across the hall, perfectly synchronized. Like my TV was broadcasting what was happening in both adjacent rooms. But there was more text appearing, a third couple's argument, and a fourth. The captions scrolled faster. Arguments from every room on this floor, all the same basic structure, all cycling on the same schedule, all repeating the same fights in the same voices with the exact same pauses and tone. I turned the TV off completely. It turned back on immediately. The captions continued. I unplugged it. It stayed on. I realized the arguing had stopped in both adjacent rooms. Complete silence from every direction. And in the silence, I could hear something else. A rhythm, a pattern. Not voices anymore. Just a steady beat that sounded like it was coming from the walls themselves. Like the building had a heartbeat. And it was timing the cycles. 43 seconds of silence. Then the arguing would resume. Exactly 43 seconds. Every time. I tried opening the door. It wouldn't unlock. The deadbolt moved, but the door stayed sealed. I tried the window. It was painted shut. I sat on the bed and waited for dawn. The arguing continued cycling through the night. Every room on the floor speaking their arguments in perfect synchronization. Repeating the same fights, the same words, the same accusations, forever. At 7 a.m., the front desk called. "Good morning, Miss Pierce. We're confirming your room extension. You'd like to stay through next weekend, correct?" I never said that. I hung up. I tried calling the front desk back. No one answered. I went to the window and looked out at the parking lot. My car was gone. I called the police. The line connected, but no one spoke. Just silence and that same rhythm. The heartbeat of the building, counting out the time until the next argument cycle. I made it out by leaving through the ceiling panel in the bathroom. I crawled through the ventilation system until I found an opening. I dropped down into the front office. The desk was empty. No one there. I ran outside. The parking lot was empty except for mine. My car was there. But looking back at the motel, I could see every window on the third floor. All of them had faces in them, different couples, visible now, standing still, staring out at the parking lot, and they all turned their heads in unison to watch me get in my car and drive away. My company called asking why I missed the conference. I said there was an emergency. They asked which hotel I'd been staying at. I described the Budget Inn on 11th. They said there was no Budget Inn on 11th in Tulsa, never had been. But when I checked my credit card, the charge was there. $372 for room 237. And every night for the past 3 months, the charge appears again. Room 237, the same amount. The motel charging me for a room I never left. And sometimes late at night, I can hear the arguing through my wall at home. Not from next door, from inside my wall. The same fight, the same couple, same cycle. And I'm starting to recognize my own voice in the arguments. My name is James Hutchins, and this happened when I was 33 years old during a solo hiking trip near Mount Rainier in Washington State. I'd taken a week off work specifically to hike the Wonderland Trail, a challenging 60-mile loop through old-growth forest and subalpine meadows. The weather report said clear skies the entire week, perfect conditions. I started early Saturday morning from the trailhead parking area. The forest near Mount Rainier is different from other forests. It's older. The trees are massive Douglas firs and western red cedars, hundreds of years old. So dense the sunlight barely penetrates the canopy. You feel small immediately. That's the point. That's why I was there. I hiked for 8 hours the first day, covering about 15 miles. By day 2, the routine was setting in. Wake up in my tent, filter water from the creek, hike, camp, repeat. Day 3, I noticed the first problem. I passed a trail marker, one of those metal rectangles nailed to trees, every quarter mile. It read mile marker 17. I checked my map and GPS. Both confirmed I was at mile marker 17. I'd hiked from mile 0 to 17 in 3 days, at a reasonable pace. Everything was on schedule. Day 4 morning, I hiked 6 more miles. Or I thought I did. The terrain matched what the map said should come next. The elevation gain matched my GPS. But when I passed the next trail marker, it said, mile marker 17 again. Same marker, same number. I'd been hiking for 6 hours and covered exactly 0 distance. I checked my GPS. It showed I was at mile marker 17. I checked it again. Still mile marker 17. I walked backward on the trail for 20 minutes, expecting to find a different marker. There was nothing. No markers. Just trail. So I turned around and walked forward again. After exactly 40 minutes of hiking, I reached mile marker 17. The same marker. Definitely the same marker. I could see a scratch on the metal that I remembered noticing that morning. I sat down on a log and tried to rationalize it. GPS drift. Misreading the map. Taking a detour without realizing. But I could see the trail clearly. It was one continuous path. No branches. No confusion about direction. I took a different approach. I left the trail completely and started hiking straight through the forest toward where my map said the next marker should be. Not following the trail, cutting through the woods directly. I hiked for 30 minutes through dense undergrowth, climbing over deadfall, pushing through branches. When I finally hit a trail again, I checked the marker. Mile marker 17. The exact same marker. Now I could see the scratch from a different angle. It was the same marker. I was standing at the same location. But I'd left the trail. I hiked at an angle through the forest for 30 minutes and arrived at the same place from a completely different direction. The forest around the marker looked different from each direction. The trees were arranged differently. The deadfall was positioned differently. But it was the same marker. The same location. That's when I saw him. A hiker. maybe 200 feet down the trail in the direction I'd been going. He was standing perfectly still, looking at his own GPS device. He looked exactly like me. Same hiking jacket, same backpack model, same hair color, same posture. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't react with surprise. He just turned back to his GPS like I wasn't there. I called out to him, "Hey!" He didn't respond. I walked toward him on the trail. As I got closer, he continued looking at his GPS and completely ignoring me. When I got within 10 feet of him, he suddenly turned and walked back down the trail. Fast. Not running, but moving with purpose. I followed him. The trail descended toward a ridge overlook. I'd seen this overlook before. On day 2. Mile marker 15. But this was coming from a different direction. The overlook looked different from this angle, but I could see the same rock formations, the same vista down into the valley. The hiker stopped at the edge of the overlook and looked back at me. This time, I could see his face clearly. It was my face. Exactly my face. Same scar on my left temple from a climbing accident. Same slight gap between my front teeth. When he spoke, his voice was deeper than mine, like my voice had been recorded and pitched lower. "You're not supposed to be at mile marker 17 yet," he said. You arrived there on day 5. "I'm on day 4, I said. "I hiked through the night. That's why I'm early." He shook his head slowly. "No, you didn't. You've been on day 4 for 2 days now. You keep reaching mile marker 17, and every time you reach it, you reset the day. You think you're hiking forward, but the trail is cycling you. You keep arriving at the same location from different directions and thinking you've made progress." "That's not possible," I said. But I knew he was right. The pieces were fitting together. The GPS glitches, the repeated marker, the fact that I could hike in completely different directions and always arrive at the same place. "How many times have you seen me?" the hiker asked. I thought about it. This was the first time I'd seen another person on the trail. "This is the first time," I said. He smiled sadly. "Then you're very early in the loop. I'm on iteration 23. I've seen 22 versions of you so far, each one at different stages of realization. Most of them don't figure it out until they've cycled 50 times. By then, they've started becoming part of the trail." He pointed behind me. I turned slowly, not wanting to see. On the ridge in the distance, I could see other hikers, 20 of them maybe, scattered across the overlook, all standing perfectly still, all looking directly at me. They were all wearing the same hiking jacket, all carrying the same backpack model, all had the same face. Me, different stages of my face, younger versions, older versions, tired versions, versions that looked like they'd been standing there for years. The version I was talking to continued. "The trail doesn't loop to the next section. It loops to the next version of you. Every time you reach mile marker 17, the trail resets and sends you back to where you started that day. But you don't remember. You think you're making progress. You think the scenery is changing. But you're walking in the same 5-mile section over and over. And every time you walk it, you leave a version of yourself behind. A copy that stays at mile marker 17, waiting for the trail to cycle another version of you through." I ran. Not down the trail, off the trail, into the forest, through the dense undergrowth, over deadfall, away from the overlook and the versions of myself standing motionless on the ridge. I could hear footsteps behind me, but not just one set. Dozens of footsteps, moving in synchronized patterns. Not chasing me, and just moving through the forest in the same direction I was going, surrounding me from multiple angles. I ran until the forest opened up onto a highway, an actual paved road. I stumbled onto the asphalt and flagged down a passing truck. The driver agreed to give me a ride back to the trailhead. When I looked back at the forest, I could see hikers standing at the tree line, dozens of them. All me. All watching as the truck pulled away. The ranger at the trailhead parking area asked how my hike went. I said I wanted to quit. He looked confused and asked why. I told him about the repeating mile marker and the other hikers. He frowned and checked his log. "You entered the Wonderland Trail 5 days ago," he said. "Your vehicle has been parked here the whole time. Your permit log shows you're on day 5 of your hike. You should still be out there." I showed him my GPS. It showed my position at mile marker 17. "According to this, I'm still hiking," I said. The ranger pulled out a map and looked at my coordinates. "You're definitely at mile marker 17, but I'm looking at your vehicle right now. You're here." I looked at my car. It was right there. But I was also out there, on the trail, at mile marker 17. I drove away that day and made it home. But my phone never stopped showing my location at mile marker 17. My family noticed I was home, but also not home. My presence here, but also there. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can feel hiking boots on my feet, and a trail beneath me, and 30 other versions of myself walking in perfect synchronization through a forest that only loops to mile marker 17. And I'm still not sure which version is the real one, the one sitting in my apartment, or the 20 others still hiking that mountain. My name is Michelle Santos, and this happened when I was 26 years old during my first week working in Boston after moving from New York. I was still getting used to the Red Line subway. Same basic system as New York, but the trains moved differently. The stops were named differently. The announcements were gravel-voiced instead of electronic. I was commuting from Kendall Square to my apartment in Somerville, a 15-minute ride. Day 1 went fine. Day 2, I noticed something odd about car 4, the car I always rode in because it had good cell service, and I liked using the commute to check emails. The car had 7 other people in it. And same 7 people every single day at the exact same time, in the exact same seats. This wasn't unusual. Commuter trains have regulars. But these 7 people never got on or off. The train would stop at stations. Doors would open. People would enter and exit the car behind us and in front of us. But these 7 people remained. The older woman with the gray coat always sat in the second to last row on the left. The young man with the headphones always sat near the door. The pregnant woman always stood near the middle pole, and 5 others in consistent positions, never changing, never moving. On day 5, I got on car 4 at Kendall Square. The 7 people were there. At Central Square, the doors opened and new people entered. But the 7 didn't move. At Harvard, more people got on. The train was getting crowded. At Porter Square, the train was full. But the 7 remained in their exact positions, in their exact seats, taking up space but not existing in the same way as everyone else. I watched the pregnant woman. She stood motionless, hand on the pole, through 3 stops. No one bumped into her. No one crowded around her. People moved around her like she was a fixed object in the space. That's when I realized the other commuters couldn't see her. They would walk right where her body was, and it was like she wasn't there. They'd phase through her. A businessman passed directly through her torso without reacting. She didn't move or acknowledge it, just maintained her perfect stillness. One of the other passengers, a college-aged kid with a backpack, stepped directly into the gray-coated woman's leg. His boot passed through her like it was made of air. The woman didn't move, didn't acknowledge the contact, just sat there, perfectly still. I moved toward the door, trying to put distance between myself and the 7, but I couldn't move. The train was too crowded. When it stopped at Davis Square, I tried to push toward the opening doors. The crowd was solid. I couldn't get through. The doors closed. The train accelerated. We had skipped Davis Square. We were supposed to stop at Davis. The announcement had said Davis Square, but we'd gone straight through. I looked at the next stop listed, Assembly Square. We continued toward Assembly. When we arrived, I forced my way through the crowd and out the doors. The platform was empty. Completely empty. No one waiting to board. No one entering from the stairs. The station sign said, Assembly Square. But the platform was exactly like the one at Davis Square. Same tiled walls, same bench positioning, same advertisements on the wall. I got back on the train immediately. At least if I was on the train, I had a chance to reach a familiar stop. The car was still full of regular commuters and the 7 motionless figures. I stayed standing this time, near the doors. We stopped at the next station. The sign said, Alewife. The terminus. End of the line. That made sense. We'd somehow jumped to the end station. But when the doors opened, there was no platform. Just track and darkness beyond. No terminal. No waiting area. Just the train line extending into absolute blackness. The station sign said, Alewife, but there was no station. I got back on the train. The doors closed. We started moving again. The next station announcement came through the gravel speaker. Next stop, Sullivan Square. We'd already passed Sullivan Square. It was 6 stops back in the direction we came from. We were at the end of the line. We couldn't go to Sullivan Square. But the train continued moving. The doors opened at the next stop. Sullivan Square. The platform looked right. The station looked right. But it was still empty. I got off anyway. At least I was off the train with its 7 motionless passengers and its backward stops. I looked at the platform map. Sullivan Square. Red line. Next, stops northbound. Assembly, Alewife. We'd somehow reversed. We were going backward on the line. And ahead of us was Assembly Square, which we'd just come from, and Alewife, which had no platform. Another train arrived. I didn't think about it. I just got on. It was a different car. Same 7 passengers. Different positions. The older woman with the gray coat sat in the first row this time. The young man with headphones stood by the door. The pregnant woman sat in the 5th row. They'd rearranged themselves to match this car's layout, but they were still there. Still unchanging. Still not quite real. I didn't get off at any station. I stayed on the train through Kendall, through Central, through Harvard, through Porter. The train descended underground, deeper than any Boston station goes. The track followed a downward slope that no red line segment should have. The tunnel walls changed from tile to concrete to something that looked organic, like the walls of the tunnel had been grown instead of built. The train descended for what felt like an hour. The 7 passengers never moved. The other commuters never acknowledged the wrongness. They just sat and stood and stared ahead like robots running their program. When the train finally stopped, the doors opened onto a platform that existed in complete darkness. There was a platform there. I could see its outline. But there was no light source. The darkness was complete. Absolute. But in that darkness, I could see platforms extending infinitely backward. One after another, all empty, all dark. A figure stood on the platform directly outside the doors. It was me. Exactly. Me. Same coat. Same work bag. Same exhausted expression from my first week of commuting. When the doors opened, she walked into the train car. Walked directly through me. I felt her pass through my body like I was made of the same air as the gray-coated woman. She sat down in my seat. She pulled out her phone and started checking emails. The young man with the headphones got up and walked out the doors. Another version of me walked on. He sat in a different seat. The pregnant woman stood up and exited. Another version of me took her place at the pole. The 7 passengers are all versions of me, aren't they? Different stages of my commute. Different iterations of my morning. Multiplying. Repeating. The train doors closed. We started moving again. Back up the tunnel. Back toward the platform that didn't exist. Back into the loop. I realized I wasn't moving the train anymore. The train was moving with me inside it, and I was one of 7 now. I was becoming fixed. Unchanging. Another version of me entered the car, sat in my seat, continued my routine. The Boston Red Line makes its rounds every 10 minutes during rush hour. 7 cars, 30 stops, 15 minutes per cycle. But deeper down, below the published stations, there's a section that cycles forever. And every commuter who rides car 4 long enough becomes part of that 7, becomes unchanging, becomes real only to the other versions of yourself that join the loop. I don't know how long I've been riding. My phone says 2 weeks since I got on at Kendall Square. But I also remember riding for months, years maybe. And I keep watching new versions of me enter the car, earlier versions, later versions, different versions who chose different seats. We're all here. We're all cycling. And every time the train passes through that impossible tunnel heading into darkness, we rearrange ourselves to welcome the next version home. So my name is Alex Chen, and this happened when I was 25 years old, during a summer weekend I spent with friends at an abandoned limestone quarry outside Pittsburgh. It was one of those places locals knew about, a secret spot where the water was clean and deep and surrounded by high cliffs. Perfect for jumping. We had been going there every summer for 5 years. The quarry was about 2 hours from the city, accessible by a hiking trail through state forest. That Friday afternoon, 5 of us made the drive up. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, hot sun, water temperature ideal. We'd been swimming there since 2 p.m. It was now 6 p.m., and we were preparing to leave. The hike back would take 45 minutes in daylight. If we started now, we'd make it out before full dark. That's when Marcus found the rope. It was tied to a metal beam that extended from the quarry wall, maybe 30 feet above the water. The rope was new, definitely not there last year. It had a knot at the bottom, a place to stand and swing. One of our group, Tyler, immediately said he wanted to try it. We told him he was insane. The cliff was already dangerous. Adding a rope swing with an untested anchor seemed stupid. But Tyler was always doing stupid shit. He climbed up the beam, positioned himself on the rope's knot, pushed off, and swung out over the quarry. He dropped into the water cleanly, came up laughing. "Again!" he yelled. He climbed back up, swung again. On the third swing, he didn't come up. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. One of us, David, dove down immediately looking for him. The quarry water was clear. Visibility was good. David came up without finding anything. No Tyler. No sign of him below the surface. We searched for 20 minutes, diving, calling, scanning the water. Nothing. The quarry just kept its depth, kept its secrets. We called the police. They sent divers. They searched for hours. They dredged the quarry bottom. They found nothing. Tyler had vanished into 30 feet of clear water and left no trace. The official report said he must have hit his head on a hidden rock or gotten caught in some underwater structure. The quarry was officially closed. The town put up no trespassing signs. We weren't supposed to go back. But Alex, our 5th friend, kept wanting to return. He was devastated about Tyler. He said he needed closure. He needed to say goodbye to the place. About a month later, the 4 of us went back. Early morning, quiet, respectful. And we brought flowers to throw in the water. We sat on the rocks and talked about Tyler, about the rope, about the quarry taking him. We were leaving when David noticed the rope was gone. The metal beam was still there, but the rope had been removed, which made sense. The police had probably taken it as evidence, or the town had taken it down. We didn't think much about it. But 3 weeks later, I went back alone. I don't know why. I needed something I couldn't articulate. The rope was back. New rope, exactly like the one Tyler had swung from. The metal beam still attached. The knot still tied at the bottom. I climbed up. I positioned myself on the rope. I didn't swing. I just stood there holding the rope, thinking about Tyler, thinking about how quickly he'd disappeared, not thinking about what might have been down there that was deep enough or patient enough to take him. I climbed back down without swinging, but when I reached the water level, I noticed something in the quarry, a figure moving underneath the water. on the quarry floor about 30 feet down. It was moving. Deliberate movement. Not fish, not current. Deliberate, human-like movement. I blinked. It was gone. Probably my imagination. I left the quarry that afternoon. Over the next 3 months, the rope kept reappearing. No matter how many times it was removed, it came back. And I kept going back to it. Sometimes I'd find other people at the quarry using the rope. College kids visiting the site. Locals who didn't know about the closure. They'd swing happily into the water. Most of them came back up fine. But every few times, someone wouldn't surface. They'd disappear silently into the dark water beneath them, and nobody could explain it. Divers came back multiple times but found nothing. Just quarry, just rock, just depth. 6 months later, I was at the rope with David. We were standing on the rocks talking about whether we should finally never return, about whether this place was worth the risk. David grabbed the rope. "I'm going to do it," he said. "I'm going to swing like Tyler did, and I'm going to face whatever took him." I told him not to. He climbed up anyway. He positioned himself on the knot. He pushed off. He swung out over the water. At the height of his swing, directly above the deepest part of the quarry, he didn't jump. He remained there, suspended above the water, holding the rope, looking down. On looking at something I couldn't see from my position on the rocks, his face changed. Not fear. Recognition. Like he was seeing something familiar down there. Something he'd been expecting to see. He let go of the rope, but he didn't fall like a person falls. He descended slowly, deliberately, like he was being lowered into the water instead of dropping into it. His body touched the surface without splashing, without disturbing the water at all. He just kept descending, deeper, slower, until he was completely submerged. His form became a shape beneath the surface, a shape that continued downward, long past where the quarry floor should be. The shape stopped descending. It just stayed there, perfectly still, about 40 feet down, which shouldn't exist. The quarry is only 30 feet deep. I dove down to find him. I swam deeper than I'd ever swum in that quarry, deeper than 30 feet, deeper than should be possible. And I saw him. David was sitting on a rock formation that couldn't exist. 40 feet down, maybe 50. The water pressure should have been crushing, but David was sitting calmly on the rock, looking up at me with a peaceful expression. He held up his hands and showed me something. A list. Names carved into the stone beneath him. Tyler at the top. Below Tyler, 23 other names. Below those names, my name. Alex. Carved into the rock already. Already there. David pointed down. Below my name, more empty stone. Space for more names. David smiled and pointed to the rope, still visible from this depth somehow. The rope extending upward. Back to the surface. Back to where the metal beam waited. Back to the knot. But David held his hand up. He was waving goodbye. He was settling in. He was becoming part of the depth. I swam back to the surface. I didn't climb out immediately. I floated there, staring at the rope, at the metal beam, at the solid certainty of it anchored to the quarry wall. The rope will always be there. Every time it's removed, it comes back. Because it's not anchored to the wall, it's anchored to something deeper. Something down there that pulls people down and settles them on that stone where they carve their names and wait for the next person to follow. I haven't been back to the quarry in 3 years. But I still dream about it. And in my dreams, I'm always looking at the rope. And the rope is always calling me back. And worst of all, every time I dream about it, there are more names on that stone. And my name is getting closer to the bottom, which means I'm getting closer to staying.